And yeah, so welcome everybody. This is actually the first Gleanly event that we've organised. And I have to say thank you very much to Liam Summers, who's organised this. And I think a little bit of it was to give me a deadline because I wrote an article about atomic research a good 3 years ago now in 2018. And I've been planning of writing an up-to-date one. Obviously, we learned a lot in the last 3 years. And honestly, I found any excuse to not do that. And Liam said the other week, okay, I've booked an event. We're going to do an event for agencies. I said, okay, when is it? 23rd of July. Went, oh my God, that's only like 2 weeks. I have to write something now. So it's given me the kick up the arse that I needed, I suppose. And so today we're going to talk about atomic UX research. Specifically, I'm going to try and talk about how it can help you guys that work in agencies, though a lot of it is transferable over to in-house. In general, I'd say that the process of atomic it is exactly the same for in-house as it is for agencies, just with agencies is a little bit extra. So we'll talk about that as well. And I really hope it's useful for you today. We should be about 40 minutes, 45 minutes going through kind of learning about atomic research. We'll do a little bit of a demonstration about a tool that we've built called Gleanly, which should only be about 10-15 minutes, and there should be plenty of time for questions. And yeah, we might even be able to let you finish a little bit early on a Friday. So hello, my name's Dan. I'm founder of Gleanly and creator of atomic research. And actually, I've worked in a few agencies myself over the years. In fact, myself and Liam, we actually created one. We actually started one when I was 21. It grew to 12 people working for us, and we had clients including Microsoft, Coca-Cola, Samsung. I would say we specialized in digital transformation. So you have to remember, this was 2009 we started, and it was only a couple of years after the first iPhone had been brought out. So every company would say, we need an app. They didn't really know why they needed an app, but they knew they wanted one. And so we specialized in digital transformation. We would say, we would research their industry, their company, customers, try and find a need, create a basic version to see if it met that need. And then the company would choose whether they're going to further invest in it or not. Maybe take what we invented and take it in-house, or ask us to take it further. Now, I know that is called UX. At the time, I hadn't heard of the term. We were using qual and quant methods to discover customers' needs. We were creating an MVP and validating the product in an agile framework. At least at that point in 2009, I didn't know any of those words or what any of them meant. And in fact, I remember the day that someone used the term UX, and I had to go off and Google it because I didn't know what it was. And my God, the whole world just opened up in front of me. All these methods and processes that people much smarter than me had developed and proved and perfected. And some of these we were already doing, say, in an informal way, but we could now stand on the shoulder of giants. It completely changed my world, really. So fast forward to 2017, 2018, I was working for a FTSE 100 company called Just Eat. It's the world's largest food takeaway platform. And I was working as a UX designer and researcher, working on some of the mobile apps. And I'd recently founded and was running the accessibility team as well. So over the years, since I'd been there about 2 or 3 years, the company had grown massively. It was already quite big when I joined, but it at least tripled in size in the first couple of years that I was there. And we had designers, researchers, BAs, all doing research around the globe. This work would be written up in reports, put into Google Drive, never to be seen again. In fact, we'd call it Google Grave because that's where research went to die. So all this knowledge was getting learnt, then lost, and then learnt again. You know, in each project, we'd spend 2 weeks, what we call discovery time, which basically meant trawling through Google Grave to find what we could, knowing that so much hard work and expensive work at that was being lost. You have to excuse me, we've got a lot of motorbikes going past it at the moment, so hopefully it's not coming too loud through the mic. So this was a serious problem, one we were all too aware of, and it really became a problem I could no longer ignore when we started the accessibility project. I keep on saying product. So it's the first team in the company that had input from across the whole company. After all, accessibility affects every part of a company, doesn't it? It affects the customers, restaurants in our case, suppliers, staff, everybody. So we had over 140 people across the globe all pouring research and knowledge into our team, and no way to manage that in any kind of useful way. I still wake up in cold sweats now thinking about it. So my idea was to take this research and theme it to make it more discoverable. And then within those things, we could have specific insights. And the idea is we'd have these insights and people could actually, if they had knowledge or research that was relevant to that insight, they could actually connect it up themselves and actually self-manage the process to a certain extent. And it also allowed these subjects to scale on their own. Now, if they had a new insight that we didn't already have in there, we made it so they could create their own and create a new theme. And then, so if someone created a new insight, others could say, actually, I have something to support that, and they could add their own research to it as well. One of the issues that started complicating things slightly is we realized that one piece of evidence could support multiple insights and across multiple themes. And what do we do then? Do we put it in one theme or the other? Do we put it in multiple places? And to compound the issue, we also started turning those insights into actionable recommendations, which also could be supported by multiple sources. And yeah, you can see already this is just becoming a tangle. So it's time to drop Google Drive, Google Grave, and start to formalize this process. And that's really where Atomic UX research came about. Now, I often are credited or claim to be the inventor of atomic research, but it's important to mention this work came about due to collaboration with many people. So first of all, the person that gave me the spark of this process was David Yates. We were talking about how information could be broken down, and he was drawing something on the whiteboard, and it really reminded me of the atomic design system, which I'm a massive fan of, and I really love. I've gone completely blank on the inventor of that. I should give him credit, but the fantastic process, and which I found really useful in my work, and that I could see correlations between that, which is the reason we decided to call it Atomic. Brad Frost, thank you, Joshua. Thank you. They're on it in the chat. Yeah, many minds helped refine this process. Big shout out to my colleagues at Just Eat, of course, the team at Clark's, Monzo, Moo.com, all helped me develop the process and test it across their highly skilled UX teams. But at its core, atomic UX research is incredibly simple. And one of the benefits of this simplicity is that it actually can be used for any type of knowledge. This process was designed by UX, the clue is in the title, but actually it works just as well with any kind of knowledge. And that's something we've only really started discovering in the last year or so. So we have teams now that are using this process and the Gleanly platform to actually de-silo teams, UX, marketing, sales, customer support, business analytics, any strategic knowledge. They could live together symbiotically. And the knowledge creates a web that means the entire company is moving forward as one entity rather than a collection of parts and knowing of the rest. But let's go through this. So we break down knowledge into 4 distinct elements. Experiments, which is what we did to discover the knowledge. It might not be as formal as an experiment, but in fact, that's the power of atomic research, is being agnostic on source. Facts are what we learnt. A good fact is a quote, observation, statistic, but it's never our opinion. And then insights are our opinion of why the facts are the way they are. They're often what we think are the cause or the effect that the evidence tells us. So it's very easy for us to say, the user did this, so we'll do that. But often it can be a bit harder to define the why. Why is that the right course of action? Why are the users doing this? And why does this solve that problem? But actually, in defining that, that can become incredibly powerful. And one of the most common pieces of feedback I get about the atomic process is we thought we understood our research before we started synthesizing the insights, and it made us think deeper, sometimes differently about what we know. And that often leads to so much more exciting and innovative recommendations, which I'll show you next. So recommendations are what we think we should do with this knowledge, the actionable result that is of what has come before. So most recommendations are actually testable as well, which creates new experiments and the cycle continues. And this is the secret to creating a scalable knowledge repository, which both retains the what and the why certain decisions were made, and importantly, what happened after. Each of these atoms connects together to create a molecule of knowledge. Actually, most people call this a nugget due to the great work that Thomas Sharon did on the subject. But that simple process has becomes really powerful when you see it from the perspective of each of those elements. So this is a fact molecule or nugget. We're looking at our knowledge from the perspective of a fact. So a fact always belongs to an experiment. This is important context for how it was learned, excuse me. But a fact can be connected to many insights. This is great because we might have several ideas of what the evidence is telling us. And we don't need to argue about one idea. We can think broadly and explore lots of reasons. But the world is rarely black and white. So it's likely is going to be to several factors, isn't it? You know, excuse me. It's also important that we can connect negatively to an insight. So this is what I'm indicating here with a red dotted line. This fact is evidence for these insights and it's evidence against this insight. We can do the same for recommendations. So talking of recommendations, this is an insight molecule or nugget. So this is perspective of the insight is connected to lots of facts, in this case across 2 experiments. It could be as many experiments as necessary. Both have evidence that supports and evidence that goes against or disproves our insight. And we can also see it's connected to several recommendations. Once again, we can have lots of ideas springing from one insight. And I like to synthesize my research with my cross-functional team. I find it a great opportunity to bring them closer to the knowledge and but closer to our customer's voice. But actually, it's really useful for me as well, because I'm from a design background. So I tend to be very biased towards solving problems with UI. But if I have a database analyst in the synthesis meeting, they're likely to have innovative ideas that would never have occurred to me. So I really highly recommend you know, processing and synthesizing with the cross-functional team. So here we see a recommendation molecule nugget, and this is probably the view that you would share with stakeholders and decision makers. They love this view. We want to be able to show them the recommendation. This is what we're suggesting we do, and the thinking behind that recommendation, and then finally the evidence. I've only shown the evidence from one insight here, otherwise it wouldn't fit on the screen easily, but this is the evidence for this insight, for and against. And we're able to show them that holistic view that makes it clear what evidence we have for and against and allow them to make informed decisions. So stakeholders can understand the evidence at that level that makes sense, at the level that makes sense for them. So what I mean by that is they can perhaps scan the insights at a glance and, you know, or really go deep and understand, you know, not just the facts, but the experiment that created them, get really deep context for each one. So that might be on an individual's personal preference, or it might be due to the scale of the recommendation, how much confidence they need to actually make that decision. And what's great for you is you only need to share one molecule or nugget, and the stakeholder can self-manage the level of detail they prefer. So actually, one bit of feedback we've gathered from our clients is that Atomics actually reduced their reporting by up to 80%. And you can imagine the amount of time that saves for people in an organization. Now, one of the things you might notice, it's probably very tiny on your screens, but up on the corner of each of these cards, we've got something called an evidence score. So what's an evidence score and what's it for? And this is simply the cumulative score of all the evidence. Each fact is worth 1, +1 or -1, depending on whether it proves or disproves. and that results in the evidence score. Now, I'm always really clear that this is just a rough idea of how well we know something. It shouldn't be taken too seriously, and it does not tell us how important something is, not even how true something is, just how much evidence we have for something. And in fact, when it comes to recommendations, the likelihood is that something really important never gets the chance to have a high evidence score. If we see something that it is really important, we've got a bit of evidence, but it's a real serious issue, we're probably going to attack it straight away. The good news is those little irritating problems that annoy our customers but aren't high priority and often get forgotten, right? They come up again and again in research, but because they weren't what we're studying, or they're not really deemed to be very high priority, they're not blocking anybody, they're not reducing conversion, whatever it may be, they get put to one side and forgotten about. Great thing about the atomic process is those recommendations, they get higher and higher evidence scores to the project manager or whoever says, look, let's just get that sorted, I'm sick of seeing it. And that can be a real positive thing, get those nice, get those little kind of irritants smoothed out. But we do often see a correlation with insights and principal insights in a high score. It's quite likely that if it's something that's coming up again and again in every single test, that insight probably is quite a principle. A good common one that I see regularly is around jargon, using insider terminology or complicated technology, terminology that our customers or the public might not understand. They're the kind of things that we should know, but do tend to get forgotten about and come up again in every project. So they're the kind of things that would end up being a principle, right? So if it's not there to tell us, how important something is, what is it for? Well, the reason is it helps us to move more quickly when we need to. So here's an example of a real recommendation. And in this case, this is just a simple wording change. It's not a big decision for a decision maker to make. So they could come in here, just glance at the score, have a look over the research if they've got time, and they can probably make that decision with a decent amount of confidence without having to waste too much time. They're busy, they can get on. Now, of course, if that was a big decision, if that was something that was really going to make a potentially big or significant or costly impact on an organization, then that evidence score isn't going to be enough to make that decision. They'll need to actually read through the evidence, and we make it easy for them to do that through this process, right? And for us as UX designers and researchers, it makes it really easy when you have those situations. I'm sure you've had this, it happens all the time to me. Someone will come and say, Dan, I need a wireframe for tomorrow. I don't have time, we've got the clients coming in, we need to get that wireframe done. Now, in that kind of situation, I don't have time to read lots of reports. And I certainly don't have time to do my own research, but I can go into my repository and search the subject I'm looking for and grab the insights with confidence. So that high score means, yeah, okay, if I had time, it'd be best if I could read through the evidence and get a deeper understanding, but I don't. And it's better I work with some evidence than working completely blind, right? And those insights with a low score, I might have a juicy insight here that it looks really interesting and I really would like to use it, but it's got a low score. So I can choose then, do I ignore it because it hasn't got very much evidence? Or maybe I take it, but I just with the knowledge that this is going to need retesting. Now, of course, the beauty of the atomic system is once, if I do take it and I do retest it and I build on that knowledge, I can connect it up and build a global understanding of that subject in my organization. So in summary, some of the benefits of atomic research. First of all, it allows repositories to scale with no limit. That was the reason this whole process started. We get a holistic view of the evidence. This is really important for stakeholders and decision makers. And importantly, we can also see the evidence from across the whole organization. We haven't got tunnel vision on what we're studying at the time, which is so easy. We've got this evidence that seems to point us in a certain direction. And it's very easy to forget that we've actually got the rest of the evidence and the rest of the real world to help us also make that decision. So we can create a real holistic view. Importantly, we can show evidence for and against. Not something that I see very often in other processes. And when necessary, it can allow us to move quickly. It removes our personal bias because the facts have to be facts. And it's so easy sometimes to mix a personal belief up with the evidence. Especially for those, if you're working in organizations where non-researchers are doing research, actually forcing them to be able to question, like, is that a fact? Have we actually seen that? Have we got evidence for that? Or is that your opinion? And if it is their opinion, it's absolutely fine. It can just move into an insight, that's all. It encourages retesting. Recommendations are almost always testable, and of course we can actually follow that around, which is really important. It's not kept in separate documents and separate reports. We can follow that through. And it forces you to think about the why, often leading to more innovative solutions. That absolutely wasn't part of the design of that wasn't the intentional of the and the design of Atomic, but I think it's actually one of the most powerful things of the process, especially when you're not using the process within a repository, you're just using it as part of your synthesis and your knowledge gathering. I think it's actually a really powerful thing. And of course, when it is used in a repository, one point that isn't on here is you're not forgetting things, you're not losing that knowledge that you've worked so hard to bring about. So after a lot of work on this process with many people, I wrote it up into a Medium article in 2018. And this was my first article. I didn't have any following on there. No one knew who I was. But that article somehow got viewed 40,000 times, and it sparked a conversation that went around the world. And actually, the process became a foundation for the European Commission research team. Uber built their own internal repository kaleidoscope around the idea, and there have been many articles in many languages about it. And it's really taken on its own life. Many people have their own methods and tweaks to the process, their own terminology, their own ways of actually doing it slightly differently. I've even seen people add elements to it. Quite often, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I very much support it. And I really recognize that everyone's organizations are very, very different and work in different ways. So take what I tell you as a starting point, feel free to use it, break it down, change it as you see fit. I'd really like to hear if you do that. I'd love to hear what kind of innovations you've had or reasons that you've had to change it. But with that in mind, let's talk about some best practices and practically how we can use this in our work. So first off, let's talk about what tools to use. Now, I started with the most simple and obvious way, which is good old sticky notes and a whiteboard. We UX teams must keep 3M alive with our posters, right? This is how we began testing this process within teams. And here you can see that we've actually affinity mapped the findings in the top section there. Each of those findings has a smaller mark on it to denote both sentiment, but also the number of times it was found. And the middle level there is the insights, and the bottom is the recommendations. At the time we were calling conclusions. And we just simply drew connections between each of the items with whiteboard marker. And so this was great for group synthesis. It's very visual, it's very tactile. It could get very messy, especially if you had a connection going all the way from one side of the board or the other. It was a very big experiment. And probably the biggest problem actually though, was that it's not very easy to share or record the results of this. And certainly it makes it impossible to connect to other evidence and other projects or experiments. So very quickly, we moved to a more digital platform and we chose Airtable. And Airtable was brilliant. So that was the first tool we moved to after Google Drive. It was really good for remote teams, especially because we were a global company. And this is obviously quite a bit before COVID hit, but we were all in different countries, even if we were in offices, and a lot of people working remotely even back then. So this was really useful. And what we did is actually set up insights and recommendations as tags, so they're easy to reuse. And it was very easy to see which were most common and be able to link across different Airtable to different products. It wasn't that easy to search across it. And one of the other limitations we had was kind of the scalability, especially because it's very easy to make a mistake and end up messing up a lot of data. You could accidentally clear a whole experiment with just a couple of key clicks. Normally you could get that back, but it certainly wasn't very stakeholder friendly. That was something we really struggled with as well. That said, there's been a few different versions of the Airtable. So this is the Polaris UX Nuggets by Thomas Sharon. I mentioned Thomas earlier. He's done so much work. He's probably he's very well, at the time he was head of UX at WeWork when he first started talking about atomic research. And I think he's really been the reason it's spread so far and wide, really. So when Thomas first used the term atomic research, he was proposing a quite simple process that was basically just taking a video and turning it into little snippets or nuggets, as he called it. And actually, his process moved closer to ours. And I believe now it's kind of gone forward. So if you look at the Polaris Airtable repo, which is there to use, the base that you can just take and use, it's actually, I'm not sure I understand it anymore. It's got very complicated. That might just be me. I'm sure there's people a lot brighter than I am on this call. But just for example, so you have nuggets, vector, magnitude, samples, insights, provocations, journeys, acts, scenes, props, sets, characters, locations, teams, projects, emotions, and industries. I found it a little bit overwhelming, but I'd be really interested to see how you get along with it if you did try to use that. Another one that's an option as well, the Accents Airtable base by Martin Guillaume, I think it is Guillaume. I might be wrong, excuse me, but they did some fantastic work over at Accents in France. Yeah, they've got their Accents Airtable. I think that's probably a really good place to start if you wanted to use Airtable as your base. I've also seen Miro and a few other products being used. Usually, especially with Miro, they tend to be best for just one-off analyst or synthesizing, I can't say the word, synthesizing, rather than a proper repository system. And actually, it was clear to us as we were going through this journey that we needed a dedicated tool, a system built around atomic research. And actually, 2 years ago, we got funding. Me and my co-founder, David Barker, we started building a product called Gleanly. Got our first funding 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, I think it is now. And we brought on 20 large enterprise alpha customers to actually help us develop and design the product around real teams. So these were big enterprise companies, mostly with mature or maturing UX teams that were committed to using the product on a daily or weekly basis, on a regular basis, and feeding back to us and being quite open and kind of quite humbly open with their data and allowing us to understand how they were using it and feed back to us. And yeah, so 2 months ago, we actually launched the product. It's fairly mature now, I would say, though it's still got plenty to do. We've got big ideas for it, but we're moving forward with that. And I'd say it's now a fully realized repository system, though there are some items that we're focused on. And we've got several hundred organizations now, big and small, using it, mostly in-house teams, but some agencies. And I'll speak more about specifically agencies in a second. Now, I'll give you a quick tour of the system at the end, but anything I'm telling you today should be usable with or without a specific platform, with or without Gleanly or any other tool. So let's talk about best practices. So this is our Atomic UX Research cheat sheet that you guys are actually the very first to see, except for Marielle. I don't think even Liam's seen this yet. And the reason Marielle's seen it is because she did most of the thinking around this. I basically just made it look pretty, if I'm being honest. And she's a UX researcher at TradeMe and definitely a thought leader when it comes to atomic UX research. So at TradeMe, they have a small research team that manages the wider company to do research. They manage kind of non-research to do researchers or people who do research, or powder people, I think, in the reops community, isn't it? So she's a really good person for this because she's got an enviable talent for explaining concepts in a really easy to understand way. So I hope you can read this. I'm going to zoom into certain elements, but we'll send the sheet out afterwards for you to be able to use and reuse. So don't worry too much. So let's take each of these items at a time. So the first one is experiments. As I said earlier, this is where we learn the knowledge. This is what we did to gather the knowledge. Now, and I said it may not be as formal as an experiment. In fact, I work with several people who don't even call it experiments. They might have other names like studies or activities, which is a really good one. But it's your source. It's where the information came from. So it could be Google Analytics, it could be an interview, social media, even a conversation heard on the bus. As long as it isn't our opinion, or if we are doing an internal study, that it's very clearly the opinion of our staff. Yeah, it's where we learned the information. Now, a fact is usually one of three things. A quote, as in I can't find the invoice section, it's a quote from a user or participant. An observation, the participant took 3 minutes, participant 3 took 6 minutes total to find the invoice section and ended up in profile settings 4 times. Or statistics, 14% of support calls are clients looking for copies of their invoice. Okay. So it's always a fact, it's always data, it's never our opinion, and it's always something we can point to. But interestingly, some of those, something like the statistic there, for instance, I think if you were using something like Salesforce, Salesforce would call that statistic an insight. Now we define an insight as the opinion on it. We define a fact as something that's has a factual basis. It's data supported. So 14% of support calls are clients looking for copies of their invoice. That isn't our opinion. It doesn't really tell us why that is. It's just if we trust the data, which we should do, it is a fact. So facts should be unbiased and hold no opinions. They should be short enough to read in a few seconds, and they should have enough context to be understood by itself. Because a fact is always normally shown in the context of an experiment, but it may not be clear from the experiment what exactly we were studying, who we were studying, or why we were studying them. So ideally, the fact should have enough context that people understand what we were doing and who was saying it, or where the information came from. Insights are where we can really think about why that evidence is and have our opinions, and have as many opinions as we like as well. So they tend to be a mixture of what happened, the cause of what happened, and the effect. And of course, you know, these aren't hard or fast rules. Sometimes it can be a little bit different. For instance, more principle or more strategic insights may be less focused on what happened, so they're being more kind of global. But an insight should be short enough to read in a few seconds and have enough context to be understood by itself. And I mentioned strategic and tactical and principle insights. So you probably understand this already, but a tactical insight would be very relevant only for what we're working on at the time. Move the button from here to there. That isn't even an insight, that's a recommendation. But you know, in fact, if the button's in the wrong place, it's very tactical. Whereas in countries where we read left to right, it's better for the button to be, the call to action to be in the bottom left-hand corner, because that's where your eye settles. That would be more strategic. And then a recommendation, that's where we actually, where we make decisions on how we proceed. So it's worth pointing out that we can actually start with a recommendation as well. If someone comes to you and says, should we do this? That's a recommendation with no evidence or a hypothesis, right? Then we can interrogate our repository or the collection of knowledge we have and see what evidence we have and create an experiment to fill any gaps that we have. If someone has a hypothesis or assertion that isn't actionable, such as I believe our customers prefer the color green, that's an insight. We can actually start there instead and see what facts we have to support that people prefer the color green. Oops. So here's some tips on recommendations. So normally a recommendation contains most or all of these items. An action, as in move the customer invoice history to the profile settings drop-down menu. Context, from the footer or for a certain audience perhaps, right? So in this case I put, so the customer can find them easier. I hope missed out the word find there, haven't I? You always spot these spelling mistakes when you're presenting, right? Sure you're used to that. So we've got the action, the context, the audience, and the benefit. customers can find them better. That's partly a benefit, and reduce calls to the contact center. So that's actually a testable KPI there, right? We can see if once we've made that change, do calls reduce to the contact center about this subject. And almost always a recommendation can be tested or is measurable, and should be. I really encourage that. So let's talk about how Atomic can work specifically for an agency. So first, I want to think about two types of agency. That's how I'm splitting things up. I'd be interested to see if you think there's any other types that I've missed here, but I would say there's two main types. The first one, which is displayed here with these two boxes, they work as consultants for their clients, almost like an extension of the internal team, or as an internal team they don't have. And then for each of these clients, become an individual repository without evidence being shared across both. And we actually have several clients right now doing this on Gleanly. And what they do is they actually create a repository for each one. The other is more like a traditional marketing agency or an outer house team, usually with specific specialisms such as marketing or an industry focus. Now, in this case, they're likely to actually want to be able to share and reuse what they learn from one client with another. Now, this is one of the reasons we wanted to do this particular presentation and speak to agencies specifically. So far, Gleanly's been very much designed and focused on in-house teams. And the reason for that is it's our belief, at least, that in-house teams and agencies have exactly the same need, but agencies have some extra needs. So it made sense to solve one problem and then move to the larger one, right? And we're kind of there, we're ready for that. So we're actually wanting to build our focus on agencies, especially ones that are looking to share data between each ones. Obviously, the first type of agency could use the system right now relatively easily, though there's things we can improve. However, we can better serve those agencies. We want to create connected repositories of what they know and share their learning with clients without risking the privacy of those clients. And this is how we think something like this could potentially work. So this is what we have in mind. Data can be connected to shared insights, but we manage what a certain client or stakeholder can actually see. So you can see these ones are blurred down here, and they wouldn't even see that there are recommendations or who the client is. They would just basically, it would affect the evidence score that I mentioned earlier. So that's where that evidence score starts becoming even more valuable. And it could be that actually we weight that evidence. So evidence for client one from client one has a higher score than evidence from client two. It's evidence on and it aids our kind of understanding, but it is a different client, and therefore the evidence isn't going to be as useful than as we retest it with client one. And it certainly shouldn't stop us retesting, right? So just to be clear, this is not currently possible on the Gleanly platform, and our roadmap is completely defined by our clients. I mean, they're almost 100% UX and product management specialists, so it'd be crazy not to, right? However, we need more agencies to both help us prioritize this kind of work, but more than that, actually help us understand how to deliver it in a valuable way that solves real problems. Otherwise, we'll just be guessing, right? So let me tell you a few benefits for an agency using Atomic Research. So first of all, this knowledge that you create for a client to solve their problems is extremely valuable. And I've been on both sides of the table here. I've worked in agencies. I've also worked in in-house teams where we've used agencies. One of the biggest frustration for an in-house team or for a company using an agency, I think, I hope you agree with me, is that you'd come along, you'd solve this problem, you'd learn a lot doing it, and then you leave and take that knowledge with you. And actually, that knowledge is incredibly valuable. You can actually deliver them that knowledge and the knowledge you created and add a lot of value. Using this process is very collaborative, or it can be very collaborative if you wish. And I think that's a really big benefit. And I don't know how to say this, but sometimes it's useful to have a record of each decision and the evidence of why you made those decisions, right? I'm sure a few people will know what I'm saying here. Sometimes customers can be like, wait a minute, why did you do that? Well, we discussed this, we had evidence, you agreed to this. Well, with a properly documented repository for each client, that can be really valuable, allow them to actually be part of that decision making, much closer to that decision making. And as soon as they question why was that decision made, you've got a record of all the reasons why and the evidence for it, and potentially them making that decision. I'm sure there are other benefits that I haven't thought of. It's been a while since I've been in agency. And for you guys specifically, I think it could be a really easy upsell. So perhaps a repository is actually something, creating a repository, managing it, onboarding a repository, actually getting it on the ground. So that is a service in of itself. And we're actually looking at potential opportunities where we could make our products a thing that you can actually sell, make money on, mark up, and profit from. I believe that delivering that extra value and delivering such tangible learnings, it adds value to what we do. It adds so much to our craft to be able to show our working, show what we learn, and deliver not just the results of what they asked us to solve, but all of the knowledge that created. I think that actually is a really valuable thing and actually encourages clients to return. And actually, that's a confusing way to have written that, know what they know. What I mean by that is, if a customer is already using a repository, we're talking very much about delivering knowledge back to them. But when we start with a project, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could actually just see everything they already know, instead of spending so much time gathering and trying to fact find what actually is already in their heads and in their company. If a company is already using a repository, we can actually get a step up as we go forward. Now, obviously, that's very dependent on them having that. Build domain knowledge, being able to share that knowledge from one customer to another without risking any of their integrity in their data. We've worked with several holiday companies, so we'll be able to help you with your holiday company. We've got domain knowledge, we can reuse that knowledge and reuse it with more evidence-based and more effectively. And of course, in doing this, I've talked about how the process reduces reporting, increases collaborativity. And I really think that's going to reduce time to delivery and also get quicker client buy-in and decision-making, because they can see all that evidence. We don't need to sit there and try and convince them, present all of the evidence. They're in touch with it straight off. So I'm going to jump off now from this. In fact, actually, I can think I'm going to do it from here. I'm going to jump over to our actual repository so you can have a quick view, a quick demo of the tool itself. Now, on our website, if you go to glean.ly, you will actually be able to see a demo video on the website. It's a 15-minute video, and it goes into a little bit more depth than I will now. But I'm just going to quickly, really briefly show you what the